Today I'm sitting down with Bharat to talk about one of his favourite movies, Arrival, starring Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. It's a film about language, time, even self-determination.
From that technical point of view, the editing just works for me really well.
And it's one of those films that doesn't end when the credit rolls.
You finish and you've got a lot of questions still, questions about life really.
So we're going to break it all down, the ending, the meaning, the themes, the cinematography, the acting, and so much more. But for now, sit back, relax, and welcome to my film club. So I'm really excited about this episode because it was actually a conversation I had with you that really tipped me over the edge about deciding to start this podcast. I'd been toying with the idea for a while, and I asked you, I said, what movie would you do? And you picked this movie, and we talked about it for 5 minutes, and I thought, this is why I'm going to do the podcast, because I want to have conversations like we're going to have today with smart, passionate people like you about movies that I don't necessarily have strong feelings about, and even studying it ahead of this. And I'm hoping after this conversation I'm going to come out with a whole new vision of it, and that's what we want from our listeners and watchers. So today we're going to do Arrival, we're not going to say how high up, but one of your favorite movies. And first question is, why, when I asked you a year ago what movie would you do on a podcast, he didn't even hesitate. He said Arrival. Why is that?
Yeah, no hesitation at all. I remember that conversation. So I think the reason I pick it, kind of two main reasons, and I'll come back to them throughout the episode. But I think number one is from like a technical point of view. I just appreciate film as a form of art, and I think this piece, and as I'll come to in more detail, really highlights a lot of things about editing, sound, and film production, and just a lot of nuanced elements to the film. So I really like that aspect of it. And then just from a story point of view, I think it's really interesting. And I really like films where you finish and you've got a lot of questions still, and you can kind of ponder over, what you think about the film and questions about life, really. So yeah, deep reasons and also just enjoyment reasons as well.
In researching for this episode, I came across a lot of Reddit threads debating different parts of the movie, and that's always a good indication that people are talking about it and thinking about it after they've watched it. I'll go first because it's like less interesting, but I watched this movie when it came out in the theater in 2016. I watched it once. I don't remember feeling particularly strongly one way or another, and I probably didn't think about it much until our conversation. You had a different experience.
Absolutely, yes. I've still got my cinema ticket here from, let's see the date. It's a bit faded. November 11th, 2016. I think that's the day after it came out in the UK. And I think I'd only seen the trailer for it the week before when I went to see Doctor Strange, I think, so that would have been like November the 6th or something like that. And I'm not one to watch trailers. I've never really enjoyed watching trailers because I just like to go into things a little bit blind in terms of you just want to have that first time experience with no expectations. But I think just being forced to see the trailer, I guess, in the Doctor Strange showing, I think it just automatically drew me in. I think there was an element of intrigue. I like all the actors as well, like the main three, and I just think it was just something that I was really driven and motivated to see, I guess. And then just as soon as I saw it, I think I was a little bit overwhelmed by how good it was. I maybe wasn't expecting it to be that good. I was maybe expecting it to be a little bit more generic than it actually was. And then ever since then, I'll probably only watch it about once a year, to be honest, so I don't overkill it.
I mean, that's still pretty good. Obviously, the movie's only been out, for a few years, relative to some of the movies we do here, but still once a year for the last few years, that's pretty good. So the next few minutes and so far, we're going to try and keep it spoiler-free to kind of give you an idea about this movie, and you can decide if you haven't seen it, maybe pause this episode, go and see it, and then join us afterwards. But with a few more things before we get to the spoiler line. So this film came out, as we said, in 2016, and it is based on the short story of Your Life, which you actually read. So tell us a bit about that again, without giving too much away. What was your impression of reading the short story, having seen the movie and liking it so much?
Yeah, so I did the reverse, I guess, of what most people normally do. So I read the short story after I'd seen the film. I think the short story came out in 1998, and obviously the film came out 18 years later. And I think they're quite different. But I think you can appreciate different things about them, and they kind of work for their respective form. So I think the short story, if you translated that to film exactly as it was on paper, probably wouldn't work as well because it wouldn't have the level of intrigue and mystery to it that I think the film gives. Whereas the kind of, I guess, the structure and the format of the film, it kind of complements the form of film and how it's edited and how it's put together, I think. So yeah, both are very unique in their own rights and very interesting, and I think you can kind of appreciate them both as their own respective forms.
Would you recommend that anyone who feels strongly about the movie but hasn't read the story should go ahead and read it? Does it add something?
I wouldn't necessarily say it like adds to my experience of the film necessarily, but I think it's if you like the film, it's absolutely worth reading the short story. It's only about 60 pages long. Really good read, and it's quite, like I said, it's quite different from the film, so I think you can appreciate it in a different form rather than just kind of reading what you already know.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the movie was a critical box office success. It grossed over 200 million on a $47 million budget. It's really funny reading some of these. They came third in the box office when it came out, but it still grossed like 24 million opening weekend, whereas nowadays you can top the box office with that and you're seen as like a disappointment. So times have changed in a few years.
Was that third in that
third that
month?
weekend, yeah. But it was still a success.
Yeah.
Whereas now you've got movies that come out number one, but it's still considered a disappointment.
Right.
Today, this is Denis Villeneuve's best reviewed movie on Rotten Tomatoes, which I was quite interested to see because he has some very good movies. Are you a fan? Were you a fan of his before seeing this, or were you not really aware of him as a director?
I was definitely aware of him. I think the only film I'd seen though was Sicario, but I've seen all of his English language films. I watched Enemy literally a few days ago because I was like, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it kind of complements the rest of his filmography really well, because I think it does that element of intrigue and mystery and things unraveling slowly and kind of being slow burner type of films. I feel like it fits into his filmography quite well, and I'd say of all of his films it is my favourite, even though Blade Runner 2049 is pretty close.
Yeah, I'm hit and miss with him. Like, I absolutely love Prisoners. Sicario, I'm kind of in between. Like, I get it, I appreciate it, I would rewatch it, but it's not a movie that I would cite as loving. But
Got you.
Blade Runner, obviously he didn't make the original, but I'm not a fan of the original, and the Blade Runner 2049 was, yeah, it's not my type of thing. It's interesting because on the one hand, he does have quite an eclectic range of movies, but there is a certain feel of all his movies, even if they're completely different, which is quite consistent. You wouldn't expect the movies if you saw them without knowing that they're by the same director, but once you know, I feel like you go, yeah, I can see it and I can feel it. And part of that is because he has collaborates obviously with a lot of the same production crew, cinematographers, directors of photography, music, which we'll talk about later. Arrival had 8 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Director, Cinematography, Adapted Screenplay, and it won for Sound Editing. So, last question before we cross the spoiler line. Who would you recommend this film to, and what mood should they be in? So, describe a person that you would say, you should watch Arrival.
If you like good films. No, I'm joking. Everyone's taste I respect. So, I don't know. It's tough to say because I get a lot of people that I speak to and we talk about films, whether they're people I'm close to or people you just meet. And a lot of people say that they don't like sci-fi. They just kind of rule it out, like aliens or any kind of make-believe, any fantasy, anything like that. People just rule it out straight away. But I actually think this film could still appeal to those people. And I think the reason for that is because the premise of it is, for me, somewhat believable. Like, I'm not saying I do or don't believe in aliens necessarily, but I'm saying that if they were to exist and if they were to kind of enter Earth's atmosphere, like the way that this story goes, the way that this film goes, I feel like is a plausible way that it would happen rather than just kind of explosions happening, if you like. I think communication would kind of be the first thing that would look to be achieved, like making that first real contact and understanding each other from a communication point of view. So I feel like that allows it to be maybe more accessible in a way to people that don't like the genre or rule out the genre to begin with, and say that they just like films to be a little bit more grounded and realistic. So I feel like the film is as grounded and realistic as it probably can be given the overarching premise, I guess, of it. And then in terms of people that do like the genre, I would say I'm not a massive fan of the term, but people call it like intelligent sci-fi, because it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to think about, I guess, rather than it just being action on a screen. So I think, yeah, if you do like something to think about, something to ponder, you know, you like to finish a film and you like to have questions still unanswered, I think that's the kind of mood that it gives off.
I think I agree with everything you said. In the reviews, I like to read the more recent, like Rotten Tomato user reviews, and some people have said about how I'm not a huge fan of sci-fi or even alien movies, but this just feels like it's in a category of its own. I do think it is fair to warn people. You kind of described out people's preferences. It is I think it's fair to say it is a slow burn. It is a movie where, especially on the first watch, it can seem like not a lot is happening for stretches.
Definitely.
So you need to have some patience.
100%. I would agree with that, yeah. So yeah, if you like things moving at a constant pace all the time in a film or in a story, maybe this isn't for you. But I think even if you do normally find that, and you do normally rule out sci-fi, I think it's still worth giving it a go. Less than 2 hours, if that appeals.
Yeah, that is was a good thing. I lied. I do have one more question for you across the spoiler line.
Go on.
I think most people who listen to this or watch this will be people who have probably seen the movie once, like I had, remember it, and be like, oh, I wonder what people have to say about it. How would you describe the value in rewatching this movie? Do you think it's a movie that gets better the more you rewatch it?
I think the replay value of the film comes in picking up on little nuances in terms of little comments that are made, that when you watch the film on first viewing, you just kind of accept as verbatim, basically. You kind of just think, oh, yeah, I've seen this earlier in the film, so I know that this is happening next, and this is the sequence of everything. Whereas I think when you watch it again, a lot of that you kind of have to reinterpret, I guess, and you actually think, oh, right, that actually isn't as I thought it was the first time. I think that's where the replay value of the film comes. And I'd say every time I've seen it, I have a slightly different experience of it, which I think is always a nice thing to say about a film. The first time I watched it, was obviously, I think the first time you watch any film, really, it is a lot of just absorbing information, isn't it? Because there's a lot of visual information, a lot of auditory information that you've got to take in, the story, all the context around the film, and obviously the context that you watched it in. I think you've got to take all that into account. So I think when you can watch it in a different context, so whether it's from the cinema to home, by yourself, with other people, you kind of have different experiences of it. And I think this film allows for that quite well because of the nature of the story and the structure of it.
Well, that's the perfect segue to, we're now going to cross the spoiler line. So if you don't want to know what happens in this, stop now. Whether you don't want to watch this movie and check out one of our other episodes, or you want to go rewatch it, watch it for the first time, but then come back with us as we now going to discuss completely going spoilers everywhere. We're going to talk about the themes, all the things that Bharat just said that you might not pick up on the first viewing. We're going to discuss to no end. We're going to talk about the characters, the story, the ending, all of that, because now we've crossed the spoiler line. I'd like to start with the entertainment value, and usually this is quite the easy part, the fun part, but this for me is the biggest stumbling block of this film, because as I said, I didn't dislike this movie when I watched it the first time, but it didn't make that much of an impression, and rewatching it the first time, I rewatched it twice recently, as I said, it is slow. You really have to put effort into watching it if it's not naturally appealing to you. So I'm just super interested for you, someone who rewatches it, you said, every year. What is the entertainment value? What is this? What is it about this movie that gives you pleasure?
So I'd say, I kind of, like I mentioned earlier in the spoiler-free section, there's like two main elements to the film that I enjoy. So the number one is like the technical aspect of it. I think as someone who studied film, has loved watching films for many years, I think I love film as a form, if that makes sense. I love the way that it's put together, and especially the editing, the post-production process, how obviously the way that something is constructed and put together in post-production can completely change the meaning, interpretation of it, and just how you experience it, basically. And I think this film obviously relies on how it's edited to make its impact, especially towards the kind of ending reveal with everything. So I think I love the fact that the film obviously plays on your expectations quite a lot with how it's edited. So obviously the beginning of the film, it doesn't tell you, it doesn't have a title card that says March 2016, and then the end of the film says, May 2015 or whatever. It's just, it goes on your presumption that you think everything is linear until I'm told otherwise. And I kind of love that, and I think that's kind of hit me quite hard when I watched the film first time. And obviously it doesn't hit me quite as impactfully when you know what's coming and when you rewatch it, but I think it still hits pretty hard every time I watch it. It doesn't take away from that kind of value of it ultimately, and that kind of hard-hitting impact that it has.
But do you think you get like a certain intellectual satisfaction now of like watching it and being like, oh, I understand what they were trying to do or what's going on here, whereas I know that I didn't the first time? Because I feel that way with Inception. Every time I rewatch Inception, I'm like, oh, I'm understanding this in a different way.
I don't necessarily say, maybe I don't sit there smugly.
No, but
I get it. I know what's going to happen, and whoever I'm watching it with does it, or whatever. But no, I think you appreciate it differently. I don't know if I have that necessarily intellectual.
Yeah, I guess it sounds super snobby to say that, but there is, it's like almost if you read it. I mean, it is exactly like with a movie. When you watch it the first time and you're literally just following the story in a linear way, and then there's watching a movie, understanding like, well, this is a theme, or it could be something like, Steven Spielberg had a very complicated relationship with his father, and you can see that that's a really important part of this, and you're like, oh, I get it. And I think this is the sort of movie, as you say, everything from, as you say, the chronology, the way it's shot, even something like Jeremy Renner's first, because now we're past the spoiler line, like one simple thing, the first thing that his first line is reading the introduction to her book, which just introduced that theme of the circularity and stuff.
Yeah.
And I read about that before my last rewatch, and then I watched it, and I was like, oh, I get that one this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, just from that technical point of view, even the little nuanced things I really enjoy. So the looking glass, I don't think it's actually ever referred to that in the film, but in the book it's called the looking glass, which is what the aliens and the humans speak through. There's like that separation that they talk through or communicate through, shall I say. And even that kind of looks like a cinema screen in and of itself,
Yeah.
and your kind of journey to going towards it kind of almost looks like an old camera. And I think a lot of the film at the beginning, something I've picked up on rewatching it a couple of times recently, is everything moves left to right
Oh, I didn't know that.
in the beginning of the film. So everything is, that's I guess how we, I guess in the Western world we interpret language, don't we? When we read it, is we read everything left to right. And whereas as the film progresses and as Louise, the main character's mind starts working differently, everything starts shifting a little bit more right to left. Or there's a few more like jarring shots. I think there's one where she's having a dream sequence. There's an interesting thing on the special features, I think, about it, in terms of it's like a weird jump cut to Jeremy Renner's character Ian, and it's like kind of your mind starts working a little bit differently. And I guess not just from the language in terms of what the aliens are saying, and language in terms of English speaking, in terms of the film obviously trying to communicate between aliens and humans, but the film language I think is very interesting as well, and how it uses its technical elements to present the themes of the film. I just think the themes of the film and the story and how it's put together, everything just complements each other really well. And I guess that gives me a lot of pleasure as a film lover to kind of see all that put together in what I think is like a very nicely done way.
That makes a lot of sense, and I have to say I do appreciate it more the more I've watched it, understanding. I don't know if for me personally those things do enough for me to watch it again next week.
For sure,
But I do appreciate it. I mean, stuff like that, I will be on the lookout for that next time about the left to right, because that is the perfect example of something that, unless you are an absolute, let's just say, film nerd, you're not going to notice it the first time.
I think we come under that category.
But when someone tells you and you see it, and what to someone else might just be a pan shot of a scenery, and you're like, nope, I see what they're doing there. So
that's it.
That's
absolutely.
very interesting.
And I think on the other side, so that's kind of the technical side of the film that I really love and get a lot of, as you say, kind of pleasure and value from. I think the other side of it is the emotional side, which I think complements the technical side, and obviously the two are very intertwined. Because obviously how the film is edited unveils all the emotional stakes and all the emotional elements of the film. But yeah, obviously the film ends with you realise, or kind of last half an hour or so, you start to realise, right, what everything I thought was in the past is actually the future. And obviously as the aliens interpret time as one, the main character Louise starts to interpret that time as one, and it's kind of her coming to terms with that. And I think when it ends, and I'll butcher the quote, so I won't attempt to do it, but when she kind of says that I know what's kind of coming, I know what the future is, and yet I'm still willing to embrace it, I'm still willing to do everything I can to kind of make it happen. And I think that just, I don't know what, I can't even explain why, I can't articulate it that well, to be honest, because I'm not a parent.
But that message appeals to you.
Yeah, that's it. And I just think it's really emotional, it's really hard hitting. And I don't know why I want to be emotional, to be honest, when I rewatch the film, but it makes me feel something that I guess nothing else has made me feel before.
Well, that's one of the most important. I mean, any art, but especially film, is very important. One thing, based on especially what you just said there about the entertainment, about the messages and the secondary story, I think maybe one problem this film does have is that the main story, the principal story, the aliens and everything is so it's so big. It's the world, it's aliens that are there, that I think a lot of people really aren't paying attention to the secondary story. So that's why most people won't really think about that until they watch it for a second or third time. But let's talk about the story. Let's start with the main story, but I think we can agree that really it's the less important of the two, exactly as you said, because it is less emotional. It's more a canvas for the secondary one. So the basic story, the one that you see when you first arrive, is she's a linguistics teacher. Aliens arrive to Earth. She is brought on board by the government to help understand them. She meets Jeremy Renner's character. She's the linguist. He's the scientist. They initially butt heads a little bit, but eventually work together. So she figures out that their language is circular, and basically that gives her access to seeing the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. And she's able to avoid a war with China, and she basically learns all their language. And that's basically, and everything is fine with the aliens. They go away. We'll talk. Actually, no, let's do there. Let's start with the end.
Yeah, yeah.
I realized in this last rewatch, the spaceships evaporate at the end. They don't actually leave Earth.
Yeah.
What's up with that? What is it? Why do they not just leave? Why do they evaporate?
I don't know. I guess that could be one of the open-ended elements of the film. I can't say there's like a clear reason or a clear indication in terms of the film.
Because I googled it, try and see, and I didn't find any. There's so many things to talk about on Reddit that people weren't focusing on that. And there is that bit where they very specifically say that there is no radiation, there's no waste, there's nothing actually coming from there. So is it possible the aliens weren't actually there?
It's possible, because I think in the short story, not that obviously everything has to translate or might be inspired by or taken from, but in the short story, they're not actually on Earth. The looking glass is almost like a video screen,
right?
Essentially. So there could be an element of that. And also the short story does very much end with, we never find out why the aliens were here. They left at the end.
There's never the we need help in 3,000 years.
No, none of that. So we actually get more of a why they're here, what is their purpose on Earth in the film than the book gives.
Right.
So yeah, it's a really good question in terms of why, what does happen to them at the end. Are they actually there? Do we actually see them? Is everything as the film is presenting? But I think that's, for me, one of the intriguing elements of the film, and where you kind of get that continuous element of mystery, and not everything needs to be answered in order for it to feel like a complete story.
Do you have some favorite scenes in that front-facing story?
Yeah, I mean, I love the initial scene of Louise being introduced to the aliens.
Okay.
And I also just love how she's the central character of the film, because I think you often get like a fish out of water story, but she is actually the expert. She is the person that's being brought into this situation, and everyone is kind of looking to her for like hope, really, and to be like resolve the situation basically, or help us understand why they're here, why these aliens are on Earth. And that first scene where you kind of see the changing gravity on their spacecraft, and you see the kind of slow introduction to the looking glass, and then obviously the slow introduction to the aliens, and obviously the film screen being the looking glass. I think all those elements, and the sound design in that scene is very jarring, and it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, because it's like an alien experience, isn't it? And up until this point in the film, you've really just been with the human characters. You've seen glimpses of the spacecraft maybe in the background, and then obviously you get the main shot of it when you're introduced to kind of the army base camp. But I think this is like you're in it now. You're kind of fully immersed in that alien aspect of the film, I guess, and it's because you're experiencing it from Louise's point of view. You kind of feel as she feels, because she is a little bit taken aback by it. She is a little bit overwhelmed by the experience, and I think the sound design and the visuals all kind of complement that, so you feel like you're in her shoes seeing these things for the first time, and it's not just like a million things you've seen before in other films as well. It kind of takes those expectations and sends them out the window, because even like the surface of the spacecraft, when they first touch it, when they're approaching the spacecraft with the forklift, even like when they touch it, and it doesn't really seem like a substance that's of Earth, and even the shape of it, it's all very unusual, it's all very jarring. So I feel like that first scene where you're fully introduced to the alien spacecraft and the aliens is really well done.
Yeah, I made a note of it last night. It's about 30-40 minutes in. So it's not like you're anywhere close to the half or the second, but it is long enough that it's not 10 minutes in. So there definitely has been a build-up.
For sure. And then other scenes I really like. Typically, I don't really like voiceover in a film that doesn't have a lot of voiceover, because it can often feel like it's just pure exposition. But I think, and we'll maybe come to it when we talk about the script and the dialogue and stuff, but I think the film does exposition really well. And the scene where it's kind of a bit of a montage and everything kind of accelerates forward with Louise, Ian, and the whole team's kind of understanding the language a little bit more. And when Ian starts to kind of voice over what's happening, and they kind of talk about, they've named them heptapods, and this is how we interpret their language, and this is the meaning of everything, and the signs and the symbols, and how they interpret language, meaning different to how we interpret language and meaning. I think that whole scene actually works really well for the film, and it kind of keeps the pace going, because I think, as you said earlier, maybe for someone that doesn't appreciate the pace of the film as much and finds it a little bit more of a slow burn, I think that scene of the film helps pick things up quite a bit.
A bit like when they meet the aliens for the first time. After that, there is 20-30 minutes of them sort of like meeting them again and understanding stuff. Yeah. And then that scene is sort of the culmination. It's like, we've been working on this, and these are the conclusions that we've come. So it's definitely a payoff.
That's it, absolutely. And then the other main scene I like is just has to be the ending. Kind of, it's a slowly unravelled, and obviously it's hinted at, and you hear, I think when you first hear Louise say, "Who is this child?" that she keeps seeing in her mind. And obviously throughout the film you've been on first viewing, hopefully the film works for you and you've been following it, kind of, you always think of them as flashbacks, and you think, because you've seen this at the start of the film and it's never really referenced again until about midway, maybe just before, then you start to see these images, but they're actually more like premonitions and flash forwards that Louise is having of the future child that she's having. And when you kind of realize, when she realizes that, you start to realize that, obviously, because you're kind of in her shoes throughout the film. And I think that really does hit hard from an emotional point of view. And I just really enjoy how that whole scene is put together. And then obviously at the very, very end, it kind of links in with the song from I think it's the Max Richter film on the nature of daylight. That song plays at the beginning of the film, and then it plays obviously at the end of the film to kind of encompass and bring everything full circle, which I think works really well.
Yeah, so obviously, and this perfectly goes into the secondary story. So the secondary story is basically, after that, the two of them, he puts a baby in her, as he has a baby, like he says so eloquently to her, and then that baby is the girl that we see throughout. She grows up. She then tells Ian at some point, how old is she approximately when she tells
I think
him?
in the film she's 12.
Is that when she dies, or
when she dies?
But she tells
him.
She tells him
early,
before, because
like
I think it's
9 years old.
Yeah. He then leaves because he can't deal with it. She gets sick and dies, and that's basically the second story.
That's right.
But what I really like about the whole two story things, a lot of the time, especially these slow paced movies with flashbacks, is you spend half the movie having flashbacks of things, and you have no idea what it is, and you're not supposed to on first viewing. You'll 3/4 of the way through have it explained that it was a traumatic thing that happened before. And even though there's a level of deception here, it's flashbacks. Like first time you go in, you think the child has died, and she's just having flashbacks to it, and it's only about halfway, 3/4, I think it becomes clear to some people that it's actually flash forwards. Do you remember the first time when you figured out that she hadn't had the baby yet, or is it when she said, "Who is this child"?
I think, I can't pinpoint it exactly, obviously, quite a few years ago now since I first saw the film in 2016, but it was probably around that point where you start to realise, and then she obviously starts to realise it in herself. And the main thing I remember from my first experience of watching the film is that scene I mentioned before, the first time meeting the aliens and kind of entering the spacecraft. But then the main thing I remember is really that ending reveal, and as everything unravels, because I think it is like, I still even now find it quite emotionally overwhelming, because it's not an emotion, I guess, that I've really seen anywhere else or experienced anywhere else, in my own life or from any other kind of form of media, art, film, whatever. So I think that ending of the film really just hits hard, and I think that's my main memory of watching it first time.
I found one theory online that I think is bullshit, but obviously she needed to go through all of that, the alien story, because then she basically becomes the expert and she writes the book,
right?
And presumably she then plays a role in the helping them 3,000. I mean, that's all fine, standard, but someone was like, maybe the disease that the daughter has something to do with what happens to the aliens in the future. And I think that's nonsense. I think there definitely is a complete separation between what happens to the daughter and the whole alien stuff, right?
I would say that's how I interpret the film, but I'm always intrigued by people's interpretations, and I find them just interesting. What people have got.
Yeah, they're interesting. They can be silly sometimes.
Yeah. So I would say I've never made that link before, and I think that's just trying to maybe find a link where there isn't one. But who's to say it's right or wrong?
I'm gonna say it's wrong. But yeah, no, I do enjoy that. Like, I found myself last night questioning. The whole thing is that would you go through that knowing the pain, but. But I think that's where the circularity, because I think people think of it, even though everything is emphasized in the circularity, the good and the bad simultaneously, people are watching it and only focusing on the bad. It's like, no, but then you're stuck afterwards having your child that has died and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, if you lose that, then you never have the good and all because they show a lot of the fun and the pleasure and all the beauty that she got out of having her child. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because I don't think the film really hits on one of the main themes of the short story, which is like determinism. I think the film kind of leaves it a little bit open-ended, where to say, could she have chosen not to have the child, for example? I don't think it really, in my opinion, I don't think the film makes it that clear whether just because she knows the future that the future has to happen, if that makes sense. Does she have a choice in the matter? But I guess you could argue that because she's seen it, it has to happen. Whereas I think the short story is a little bit more clear, where it says, this is the future, there's nothing you can do to change it. It is just, we are bound by time basically to say it's going to happen.
So you're right that they don't emphasize this, but it's everything you've just said. The table is laid to think about it, and I found a lot of people debating it, and I have strong opinions, so we're going to stay on that.
Go on.
So, because I think people mix up what we're talking about here with time travel, and I think the climax of the movie is when she finds out from her future self the phone number and the final words of the Chinese general or president.
That's right.
And I think that's where it can get confusing whether it is time travel of some sort. It's like almost like a butterfly effect thing where she's like transposing like herself in the future, whatever.
Yeah.
But my understanding is it's not that. It's more that the aliens and as a result her kind of exist in all the times at the same time. So she's able to, in the same way you would remember something in the past, she's remembering something in the future. And it isn't a time travel thing. It is a circle. Like life exists as a circle, and you're basically constantly like, well, it's not even that you're constantly going around, but it is one circle. But there is no changing it, is the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and I think it's interesting. I've not seen these kind of theories and stuff on these threads, wherever you've seen them, but it's interesting that people would maybe attribute the film to that, because I guess that's taking your preconceptions of what is already out there and applying it to this, which I think the film is trying to obviously do the opposite of, and that's kind of the message of it, and the language is meant to go against all our preconceptions of, oh, this is how people behave towards each other, this is how different beings behave towards each other, whether it's with aggression or whatever, this is how we communicate with each other, and you take your preconceptions of what we do and you apply it to everything else. So I think that's very interesting that people would
you just blew my mind there. Like that's I've often thought about, like, we think about time travel a lot now, mostly because of movies, because obviously it's not possible, it doesn't exist. But stuff like Back to the Future was like one of the like big ones that started. I realized a couple of years ago that like the multiverse as a concept did not, again, it pre-existed in the comic books, but 99% of people had never thought about it. But now people, you actually do think about, and it's not just everything everywhere all at once. When I watched that and I was like, oh, this isn't just a Marvel thing, this is just like a concept now. And that happened at one point with time travel, that no one thought about it, and then obviously sci-fi books that then got made into movies, and now everyone has now thought, oh, what would I do if I could time travel and stuff like that? But this is not a real thing. So this is another view of that. I think you're totally right. This is a view of time which is quite abstract, but people then put time travel on it. But I think that's where they're wrong. I think this is the thing with time travel, is the idea that there is an original timeline that then when you get time travel you can change. Whereas in this, I think it is just that she was always going to have this experience, and she was always going to have the child. And it's not even that people see, oh, you're stuck to your destiny, but I think it's more that this is just, she was always going to make that choice because she was always going to know at the moment where she made the choice that was going to happen. It was never a case of she had her child and then she got sick and then she went back and found out that if she had the child she would have it. Whenever,
that's right,
that conversation always happened that way with him at the end, is my point. There's no alternative. There is no multiverse.
Yeah, if you're wondering if this is a sci-fi film that has originated the multiverse concept.
Let's move on to the characters, and sometimes I like to end with the main character, but I feel like here we're just going to start with her. So Amy Adams as Louise. What's your initial, let's just start with her and then we'll talk about the character, but how do you find her in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I like Amy Adams in a few films. I've not seen her in tons, to be honest, but I think this will always be the film that stands out for me from her. She just plays the character really well, and you feel like you're in the character's shoes throughout the film, especially in the beginning sequences. You know, I think that first opening sequence, you literally connect with her immediately because of that emotional kind of stakes that that are kind of thrust upon you as an audience member. You feel like obviously connected to her very quickly, and you obviously feel very sympathetic towards her. And I think that just instantly connects you to the character. And then obviously with the alien experience, because she is the expert and you were introduced to her first and you kind of understand her livelihood. And then obviously she realises she's a little bit late to the party, I think, isn't she, at the beginning of the film, with these aliens landing in the Earth's atmosphere. So I think she's just a super interesting person, and you're kind of with her throughout the film. And because like I mentioned earlier, because she is kind of the expert, everyone is looking to her, which I think kind of subverts a lot of how films are done often. Like especially in alien films, you often get people that are kind of just your average Joe experiencing an alien invasion, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong or bad. There's nothing bad about that necessarily, but this is just another interesting interpretation. Or on the flip side of it, you see someone who is maybe really powerful or in a commanding position, whether it's in government or, if they're an alien themselves, like Superman, for example, or a superhero, whereas this is someone who's just really good at what they do, and is the right person for the job to do something that's kind of quite grounded and realistic, which is just try and have a conversation with these other beings. So I think that's what makes her quite an interesting character.
Yeah, I like the character for all the reasons you said, but then I feel like where I think there's a bit of a disconnect for me between the character as it potentially is written and then her performance is I was trying to write down. I think initially I was like, she seems quite one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Same sort of mode. But then I was like making notes about like, what do we know about her? So very smart, very like competent at her job. But then I realized one of the things is that she is quite I don't know if abrasive is the right word, but like she, the first thing she says is, I'm not going to do this your way. I need to meet them. And they're like, nope. And so she's quite like, combative about that. And I feel like obviously Amy Adams is saying the lines and she's like doing it. But I feel like she's always in the same range of emotions. Like there's very little difference between her expression and the way she talks, whether she's confused or sad or angry. And I think part of that is the way she does it. And maybe the direction was, I want you to, act with your eyes sort of thing. But I do wonder if there had been a character that had more range of emotion, that like actually got angry at certain parts. Because again, her actions are saying that she is angry. She's breaking rules. She's like doing stuff. So that I do wonder whether that was a directional choice to keep her more monotone, or if that was just the way Amy Adams does it.
I think that's really interesting. I wouldn't even disagree with you at all, to be honest. I guess it's just where... I don't think that comes down to maybe what this whole podcast is about, whether what in a film works for you and what doesn't work for you, or does a film in total work for you, or doesn't it work for you? And I think for me, the way I interpret a lot of that, and because I think she is quite I don't know if cold is the right word, but especially at the beginning, she is pretty like flat, I guess. And I think your assumption, sorry, when I say start of the film, I mean after that opening kind of montage sequence when her daughter dies. But I think, when you meet Louise right at the beginning of the film, when she's in her university and her job, and she just kind of seems quite blank. And I think your assumption is that she's like that because of her past experience, I guess. So, and I think that invites you on repeat viewing to kind of be curious as to maybe why is she like that, because these things haven't happened to her yet, and she doesn't know about the heptapod language yet. So why is she like that? And she obviously has that brief conversation with her mum on the phone, if you remember, just after she goes home after the kind of university's on lockdown, when the aliens arrive, and she has that conversation with her mum, and she says, I'm fine, just, again, I'm going to butcher the line, but she kind of says, I'm fine, just, me, same as ever, kind of thing. And I think that actually invites a bit of curiosity to be like, who is this character before we actually meet her in the story. And then later on, she has a conversation with Ian. I think they're on the truck, they're just looking at the spaceship, they're just having a little bit of relaxing time after this whole overwhelming experience that they've had, and they both talk about being single, and she says, again, gonna butcher the line, but she says something along the lines of, trust me, you can understand communication perfectly well and still end up single. So I think those little nuanced moments kind of invite you to think about who was this character before, if that makes sense.
There's a lot you said there that's super interesting, and starting from the beginning, I think a great point you made is that if she had, as I implied, started off maybe more like chirpy at the beginning and stuff, it wouldn't have made sense, because you're like, wait, she's just lost her daughter. So maybe she was very much told, it needs to be ambiguous. Maybe you're just a person that's a bit recluse. Maybe you're in mourning. It needs to be like, I guess it makes her more of an enigma, which plays really well with the movie as a whole, of like, you don't actually know where she stands.
That's it. Yeah, I think it works well following off that first kind of montage scene of her losing her daughter, because I guess the film wants you to think that everything is happening in a linear sequence, but actually, obviously, you watch the whole film and then you rewatch it and you realise that's not happened, and I think that kind of makes you wonder about the character a little bit more, like, actually, I know who she is during the film, I have some understanding of who she is after the film, but now I have to think about who she was before the film started.
And I guess I'm also thinking about the ending, which is basically the middle of her story, that is when she's the most emotional. And I guess the whole alien experience opened her up to like her emotions. So now as we dissect this, I'm seeing a bit more why she was told to play it more flat, to kind of give her the space at the end to be, I know all this stuff is going to happen to me, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be terrible, and I'm going to love this man, and he's going to break my heart. And yeah, so I guess I've changed my mind. I think she does. I think the way I was looking at it was a very different movie. I don't know if it would have worked as a whole. And yeah, I think I'd say even before that, I think she does a pretty good job, even though she's, like you said, I don't have any particularly strong feelings one way or another about her. The Jeremy Renner one, maybe you'll change my mind again, but my first thing, like, she's obviously a very attractive woman, but she's kind of believable as like a scientist. Like, she's got that, librarian look or whatever. But Jeremy Renner is literally an Avenger, and I find him as this like dorky scientist a bit hard to believe.
Yeah.
So him, and if we do the recasting, I think we can have some fun there. Is it like, okay, so quite important question: was Jeremy Renner too hot to be this character in this movie?
I think you might have just insulted scientists everywhere.
I stand by it.
But I don't necessarily disagree. I wouldn't necessarily say just based on his looks. But yeah, I'd say the Jeremy Renner character works for me. But I wouldn't say it's like, oh man, Ian Donnelly in that film. That's my character. That's my that's my guy. I wouldn't necessarily think of him like that in any way. That's not to say that Jeremy Renner doesn't do a really good job in the role or anything like that. I think he's great, and I think the little nuanced moments that he has with Amy Adams in terms of kind of slowly building their relationship, which I actually don't think I don't think they have amazing chemistry, and I don't think their relationship at the end is fully fleshed out throughout the film. I wouldn't say
that scene you mentioned where they're talking on the truck, I think that is literally the only non-work related conversation they have in the whole film, except for the end of the movie.
Possibly, yeah.
I do feel like at the end when he basically says the craziest thing about this isn't the aliens, it's meeting you, I'm like, I get what you're trying to do there, but really? Yeah. Like, aliens just came to Earth and the world almost went to war, and you're like, you're more important than that.
Hey, if someone said that line on me, then done. You'd be snapped up. But no, so yeah, I wouldn't say Jeremy Renner's character kind of works for me on every single level, but I think he works well for the film. But I think, yeah, if Amy Adams and Dr. Louise Banks, if that actor didn't work, I think the film would fall apart. So I think, the main character works, which I think is the main thing.
I think she works, the character, the actress, and the main, that combo works better than him. But let's just pose the question then. What is apart from literally making a baby with her, what is the point of his character?
It's, I guess, to balance out a little bit of it becoming overly linguistic in terms of that aspect of the film, because I guess he's like kind of the science head, she's more of the linguistic communications head, and then you've obviously got the military head in Forest Whitaker's character, Colonel Webber,
which we'll talk about in a second.
So I feel like you've kind of got those three different bodies of the film, and then obviously you've got kind of the emotional body, which is the daughter, so I'd call those kind of the four main characters of the film, and then obviously you've got your military personnel kind of hanging around it, and then you've got your aliens as well. But yeah, I'd say those four are kind of the main characters of the film, and I think it's just to bring a little bit more balance so it doesn't shift too much one way, because I think a lot of alien films can shift too much towards the military way, and it becomes very military focused, and those tend to be like your action heavy films that don't have a lot of nuance and intrigue to them, and a lot of the science, and obviously that's what Ian's character brings, is a little bit more of the science and the logical thinking aspects. And then obviously you've got Louise's character, which is maybe a little bit more unique to a lot of alien, I don't want to say invasion because it isn't an alien invasion film, but kind of alien based films, and I think she brings something kind of new and interesting to kind of balance that out. And then obviously you've got Hannah, who brings that emotional core to the film as well.
And I guess one of the main themes is about collaboration, both at a humanity level, but also at a human level. So if she was just like, I'm the boss, I figured everything out, I'm doing it all by myself, that wouldn't really lend itself to that theme. So it does make sense that they work together on that. You mentioned Forest Whitaker, so yeah, I see what you mean about Hannah. So we'll say the four main characters, but the three who are actually in the main story, it is the three of them. The others are very background. So again, with him, I definitely think Amy Adams is the best cast. I think Jeremy Renner a little less so for reasons that I've said. Forest Whitaker, I feel like is quite overqualified for this character because he is, one of the best actors of his generation, Oscar winner and everything. And for him to just play, there is dimensions to his character. He's not just like a military man. He obviously comes to understand, and he acts as the liaison and stuff. But I do wonder if they needed to have Forest Whitaker to like do that. But again, I pose the question: then what is the purpose of his character?
I think his character is important because he kind of is that segue is not the right word. Sorry, is that kind of linking point between hard hitting military decisions being made and obviously trying to do things in a good pace in terms of communicating to the aliens. Obviously, Louise's approach and her perspective is we need to be very mindful. We need to tread carefully. We don't want to misinterpret things. And then right at the top of the the military chain, who we never really meet, those people asking the questions and kind of putting the orders down the chain, if you like, they're going to be the people that are just like, no, we need the end goal instantly. Like we need to get to that end goal of what is their purpose on Earth. Whereas Louise is at the other end of the spectrum, and I think Forest Whitaker's character, and I think he does a good job of it, is kind of in the middle of that. Obviously, he leans a little bit more towards the military side of it because that is his job.
Yeah.
He is a colonel. He is kind of someone in command. But I think he sees Louise's side of it.
Yeah.
And I think without his character, she wouldn't be able to achieve what she does achieve because things would be too enforced upon her. But he kind of gives her the freedom to say, right, you can have your own vocabulary or you can change your approach a little bit more.
But
in terms of how you do things.
But he does try and keep her on mission. It's like, yeah, we're not here for fun. We have a mission.
Yeah, he just kind of constantly remind her that we do need to get to that end goal, and these are the things happen in the other 11 locations around the world where these spacecraft have landed. But it's interesting you talk about the actors quite a bit. So would you say that you see the actors in all of these characters more than you see the character? If that makes sense.
I'd say in Jeremy Renner's case, yeah, again, because he doesn't fit to me the mold of, a dorky scientist.
Yeah.
At least they didn't put glasses on him to try and like make him
in the opening scene, he's got some glasses.
Oh, well, there you go. I very much see Amy Adams in that because she is playing, even though it's a very interesting character, she is very much playing a very Amy Adams character. Like, even though she is a strong character on paper, I think she comes across as just like a bit overwhelmed, a bit like unsure. Again, her actions say differently, but it is a very Amy Adams. Yeah, I think she very much is. It's not one of those where she gets lost in the role, put it that way. And then Forest Whitaker is playing I would say a version of himself. So I do very much see all three of them. And that's where, for me, if they had less known actors, because all three of them are A-listers, they were then, they are now. Mm-hmm. I feel like if at least in one of them there was a less known person, but that I just saw them and not the actor, that would be... I'm not saying it would be better, because I do appreciate good actors.
Yeah.
But I think it is one of the risks about casting, like an all-star cast.
So I'd say I agree with you in terms of Jeremy Renner's character, but not with the other two. And the reason for that is I think just because of the timing of when the film came out. It was probably like prime time Marvel. Yeah. I think Civil War came out that year.
Yeah, I think he just finished shooting Civil War and he went to shoot
That's right, yeah. And I think Civil War came out in April and then this came out in November. So I guess very fresh. You know that more films are coming featuring him as Hawkeye in the Avengers films and whatnot. So I think, it's maybe a little bit harder to detach with him.
I also think he's the obvious character to get a lesser known person, because I think obviously Amy Adams, you got to sell the movie, put a star, and I think having the secondary all-star, not cameo obviously, but supporting, like Forest Whitaker is very much, if he wasn't, but if he were nominated for an Oscar, very much be a supporting role. I think having A-lister supporting role is fine, but I think it would have been interesting to have a lesser known but obviously equally talented person in Jeremy Renner's role would have been interesting as well. And because I don't feel like he brings, apart from being Jeremy Renner, I don't feel like he brings a lot to the role. But any competent actor. And again, it would have been nice to have someone that looks more like a scientist. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the recasting because I have some interesting suggestions for him.
I look forward to it.
We've talked about the dialogue, and obviously in a movie that is so much about linguistics, that's a key part. What is your overwhelming view of the dialogue, the script? Like, do you think it's something that elevates the movie? Is it kind of a non-factor? Is it a detriment? I'm sure it's not the detriment, but what are your thoughts on the script?
I think the script works really well. I think it's really hard to do in a film where there's a lot of mystery and a lot of concepts that maybe you don't understand. So obviously they talk a lot about some scientific theories, a lot of linguistic theories. So they mention things like non-zero sum game. talk about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So I think those concepts being introduced in a film, if you already know them, obviously you'll have that baseline understanding. If you don't, then obviously the film needs to communicate to you what they are and what their relevance is to the film and what their relevance is to the story, and and flow that into everything else. So I think the film does it really well by using exposition in a clever way. So I think Louise always demonstrates her points rather than just tells them, if that makes sense. So she doesn't just say this equals this or this means this. She actually might use like a little anecdote, or like a short story, or it might be a little bit of like a flash forward or flash back, in terms of how the film presents the concept, which I think keeps the story going. Obviously as a bit of a slow burner, I think if you had that dry exposition where it's just this equals this, it would be quite dull and would be quite boring. You'd be like, okay, cool, yeah, I don't care. You know what I mean? Whereas it presents it in kind of an interesting way, and she presents it to the characters, to like Ian, and she presents it to Colonel Webber in an interesting way to get them to understand. So you almost kind of have to sit in their shoes for a little bit. So you kind of connect to the characters in multiple ways, which I think is a nice way for you to connect to characters that you've kind of just said that you maybe don't connect to as much as the main character, but it's a nice way maybe to link in those supporting characters a little bit more. And then I think the script also works well because a lot of it is obviously, a lot of the film is about visual communication. It's not just about verbal communication. So there are stretches of the film where there might not be a lot of talking, and obviously when you meet the aliens, they're making noises at the beginning. But obviously you've literally got no idea what they're saying. Louise has no idea how to interpret those noises or anything, whether they're aggressive or whether they're actually giving off sound or whether they're just noises that their bodies are making. She just has no idea how to interpret it. And obviously later on then we're introduced to kind of their second form of known communication, which is I think heptapod B, as the short story refers to it as, which is the symbols and the signs, which obviously then Louise is like, right, we can do something with this, we can try and interpret this and understand this. And I think the film having stretches where there isn't tons of dialogue and you are just seeing things happen, I think the film works really well in that respect.
Yeah, I think I think it's fair to say it's a high concept film, but and even though there's a lot of subtleties in the stories, but in terms of what's actually happening, it isn't one of those where I think you get lost. As you say, I think they do a good job at explaining complicated concepts, at introducing all of the elements to us. And yeah, obviously the fact that she's teaching everyone, the military, helps us because she's teaching us at the same time.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Any particular quotes or that stick out to you, like particular? Because I think when people say, "Oh, it's a good script," it can be what we're saying here is that it does the job, it supports the story well. Other times it can be, oh, it's very quotable.
I'm with you. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say like I'm gonna write any of these quotes on my wall or anything. And it's not like it's not like a Tarantino film where you like something sticks with you and you're like, yeah, that was a cool line, I'm gonna use that. When I'm chatting to my friends or whatever. But I do like the line of narration towards the end. I think it's maybe in the last half an hour or so where Louise says, again, I'm going to butcher it. I think I mentioned it earlier.
You don't have to keep saying that you're going to butcher it.
Where she says about I know where the journey leads. I embrace it.
Yeah.
So she knows what her future is going to be, but she chooses to have it anyway, and she's kind of going to embrace that future.
I will say, so I have two sides to this. For such a good movie, objectively, whether it works for one or not, it's one of those movies you can't say. No one who has two brain cells to rub together should say this movie is bad. Maybe it doesn't work for some of you, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad movie. I will say for a movie that is good, the final words being, "You want to make a baby." Yes, yeah. So I wrote this down to like make this as a joke, but upon reflection, because I think it's important for the story to basically it being offered to her as a binary choice. It's like, what's coming. Do you want to do it or not? And for her to say yes, yeah. But it's pretty corny.
the option of words.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
But you know what? I'm thinking about it. I don't know how else you do that. Like I imagine the writing room is like, guys, we need to find a way for her to say that she's willing to keep doing that. How do we do it?
Yeah.
And it's like, put a baby in me. You want to make a baby?
Yeah, I don't have any defense to that.
Also, I don't think they've even kissed at this point. It's pretty forward of it. Yeah. This is why they needed Jeremy Renner. They were like, none of these nerds can pull off saying this line at the end of a movie.
No, you make a very good point there. It's give me something to think about. I'd say the only part of the film that maybe doesn't work for me as well, and this is one thing actually, I did read a couple of maybe comments online. The scene just after halfway where the soldiers are obviously exposed to some content online and they're having their own thoughts and kind of concerns about the aliens, and they're not liking where the situation is going. So they think they need to put on an act of aggression towards the aliens, and they don't think that their government is on the Montana site is doing enough, and they maybe think other countries are being a little bit more forceful and impactful in terms of their reaction to the aliens, and they obviously set a bomb off in the spaceship, and it kills Abbott, one of the two aliens that we get to meet in the film, and obviously injures our two main characters as well. That aspect of the film doesn't actually work for me as well. I feel like it is led towards throughout the film. You kind of see little glimpses of it, but then it just kind of happens.
But did they need it?
Yeah, and then it's never touched on again. And the interesting thing I read online was that Abbott and Costello came to Earth knowing that was going to happen, obviously, because they perceive time as a whole.
Oh.
So that they've even though they know that's going to happen, they sacrifice one of them to allow it to happen, because they know it's important for Louise and the humans to see all these images and get this information across. So I think that's an interesting interpretation of it. I'd neither agree nor disagree necessarily. I think it's just an interesting interpretation. But I don't think in the film, it's because it just kind of happens and then is never talked about again. They just kind of briefly mentioned, oh yeah, some soldiers have been watching too much online content or something, and then that's it. That's the last we hear of it. So yeah, that doesn't necessarily work for me in the script as well as everything else in the film.
It feels like one of those things that it was needed for the plot. I always think of something like that. Okay, if we remove it, we're taking out 5 minutes of the movie. I think it is interesting to see how the soldiers are reacting to it. But okay, well, here's a question, because obviously I remember the time seeing them watching their laptops, seeing the Alex Jones type stuff and their looks. Mm-hmm. But do you see them setting the bomb up? Or do you just suddenly see the bomb and then see them down at the spaceship with the guns defending themselves? Because both times I feel like I've missed them actually setting the bomb, or is it really discreet?
I think, yeah, you do see them, because the main base camp is trying to talk to them and they're not responding, and then you see them flick the timer on from 10, it's a 10-minute countdown, and then they obviously leave, and then Louise and Ian arrive and they say you can't go up, and I think the main soldier that we meet,
because they didn't plan on them being in there when it happened.
That's right, yeah. Okay, so the main soldier just says, let them go up. Obviously he knows what's going to happen, but then he doesn't care. He doesn't obviously care about them. So I think there's been a mild bit of conflict, because they keep their hazmat suits on the whole time, don't they? Even when Louise and Ian show that they can stay in there sustainably. So yeah, I think it is an interesting part of the film, and I think it is very much it just like everything we've talked about, I guess, is either it does or it doesn't work for you. It doesn't take away from the film for me, because I think it means a lot to me outside of that moment, but it doesn't add anything to the film. And I think maybe it is just there because I think I do remember it being in the trailer. I guess it is like a bit of that looks interesting. It's a bit of action.
Yeah, it is the only bit of action.
Yeah, because there is no real main bits of big explosive action in the film besides that moment. So maybe it is just a case of including it for that reason potentially. I don't know.
It's right before the explosion, right, when they spit out all of the data, right?
That's right. Yeah. So just as it's happening, they split it all out, and then obviously they capture it on the cameras, so that's obviously where they're talking about off a weapon, but obviously they're offering it as a gift to humanity to learn their language, to understand that they understand time not as linear but as whole, and then that's kind of then the explosion happens. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a plot purpose for it that without that, without A, B couldn't happen and the story couldn't happen. So I can't. Maybe part of it is that, but I don't see why they couldn't have done it. I mean, you could argue if it wasn't for that, they would have spent another 6 months trying to get to that point.
Potentially, yeah. And I guess it does add some element of tension, and it again pushes the story along a little bit, because then obviously from that, the ship moves a little bit, elevates higher above the Earth, and then it's not as accessible, and then obviously it's only Louise that is going to be at that point, you assume, is going to be invited up. No one else is going to be invited up at that point, because they're the only one. She's the only one that they trust.
The whole thing about Abbott and Costello knowing that it's going to happen but still doing it, that's a mindfuck as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because they obviously, just like Louise at the end of the film, knows that her daughter is going to die in the future of an incurable rare disease. They know coming to Earth that one of them is going to die, but they go anyway because it's an important mission and they need to do it. And they obviously, depending on your interpretation of the film, if it's determinism or you do have the free will to choose your future and dictate, then they kind of choose to do it anyway.
Yeah. God, it really makes you think.
That's why I love it.
Speaking of things that you love, so the production, we've obviously touched upon it quite a bit. So when we talk about this, it can be anything from the directing, but in this case, I think the cinematography, the music, this is when I asked you the things that you love about it. You talked, the story comes second, but you really start with the way it looks, the way it makes you feel because of the way it looks. So, I guess talk us through that. Talk us through what you see when you see this movie, what you feel, what you hear, and all of that.
So I'll come back to the editing to start. So I think that's where the film obviously works for me the most from a technical point of view. I think if the film wasn't edited well, it wouldn't work at all. It just wouldn't function as it's supposed to. It wouldn't have its intended messages put across. So I think that's where the film works for me very well. And I think with that, it's paced very well as well. And I think that's something I always kind of look out, not necessarily look out for, should I say actually, but it's something that I always reflect on after having watched a film. I'm always like, I noticed that film was paced really well. Like the story beats were kind of in a nice sequence, or there wasn't too much too soon and then nothing happening for ages and then loads happening and then nothing happening. I think this film is quite slow building, but it's consistently slow building. So
I was gonna say I'll push back a bit on the pacing, but I guess if you want to argue that it is consistently slow, I will agree with you on that.
So yeah, it's consistent.
I personally think that it could be. There are definitely bits where it could be tightened up by like a few minutes here and a few minutes there, but I do appreciate talking to you that there is an element of sometimes just being like, just bask in, like, give you 2-3 minutes for a shot that could have been 20 seconds because you really want to bask in the beauty of the way it's shot.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I think the editing just works for me really well, and obviously that ties into the film's theme and the unraveling towards the end of it being non-linear. And then I think from a sound point of view, I think all the jarring weird music and sounds that the aliens make and everything like that, again, just because it's so unusual, it kind of puts you in that mood and moment of you feel like you're experiencing these aliens and these otherworldly beings and otherworldly elements for the first time. So I think that from a sound point of view just works really well. And then I just think the film looks very nice. Like, it's pretty grey. It's a pretty grey film, isn't it?
Yeah, but also like the Montana scenes are beautiful, and I do think there's quite green there. So like, I think I agree. I think it's very slick. Yeah. It's like, this will be a weird one to draw a comparison with, but I was watching Braveheart for the first time from beginning to end the other day, and it looks like shit. Like, I get that they're basically cavemen, but like the mud, the clothing, the huts, I was like, and obviously it's a much older movie, but this movie is the complete opposite, because aliens can be done in so many different ways, but and the aliens themselves, they're not like they are quite monstrous, so they could easily be dirty or whatever, but everything around them, the way they're presented, their language is beautiful, the spaceship is beautiful, even stuff like the way the military base works really appeals to my OCD about how like organized and everything it is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I thought of things like that actually, yeah. But yeah, I just think the film, it just looks very neat and tidy and really well polished, I think. And yeah, I hadn't even thought about mentioning the actual, the main beings of the film, which are two main alien beings that we see, Abbott and Costello. Yeah, I think they look very interesting and intriguing, and they look unlike anything I think you've probably seen in a lot of
I was thinking
films.
That earlier.
They kind of look. It looks like a seven-fingered hand kind of thing, which is interesting and kind of makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable as well. And the fact that you don't actually see the whole of them for a very long time, and even when you do, they're in that kind of weird, cloudy, smoke environment.
And the fact that there's a screen, you do always, a bit like her, you do always feel a bit... Well, this brings to, again, the whole, are they actually there? Because the fact that they're behind the screen with their technology, it could just make it look like they're there in 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
Because they are actually quite gross up close, despite how slick everything else is. This is a nitpick I have in general about certain alien things, is the idea that this is what they look like, but they were able to build that spaceship. I'm like, I don't see opposable thumbs. I think there's a lot with aliens when they're supposed to, in like Independence Day or stuff like that, when they're these like monstrous aliens that have these super advanced spaceships. I'm like, I don't see how you're picking up a screwdriver with that if that's what your biology looks like. Obviously, they could have technology that goes way past that, but it's not a serious nitpick. But yeah, they look quite primitive as like a monstrous being.
Yeah. They don't look, well, from our perspective, I guess,
from our
perspective,
think of like... Another thing that I think you'll agree on this, is quite appealing, is like, obviously they were going to make it circular because that's the whole point, but the actual aesthetics of the language is like quite entrancing of the...
Yeah, definitely. I actually had, I was going to bring it, but I must have thrown it away. But I actually printed a COVID mask with the symbol on, and it just didn't look very good on your face. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to wear that. But no, yeah, it's very, very capturing. I think that's one of the things I remember when you asked me about my favourite scenes. That moment when you see the first visual language for the first time, it's kind of like, it takes you back because you're not expecting it. And I guess our preconceptions are always, right, we're going to talk to these beings, we're going to speak to them, and then it obviously doesn't happen. and we see this visual language, and it's obviously doesn't look anything like any of our human languages. Like I can't think of another human language that I've seen that looks remotely anything like this, and it's obviously it doesn't quite make sense to us. But then even when you watch the film, like you can't read it.
No.
You know what I mean? Like Louise says she can read it. I'm like, can you?
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously it's science fiction, and she's very smart, and I'm not a linguist, but I'm like, really? Or when she even says like, "Are you?" Yeah, she can read it or dream in it. I'm like, I don't know. That seems
yeah.
that's what doesn't work for me.
Yeah. But no, it does look very alluring and interesting, and I think that's kind of contributes to the film's overall intrigue and mystery, and it captivates you in a lot of different ways because it's doing a lot of things I think a lot of films haven't done before. And I think if it did have like generic looking aliens and a generic looking spacecraft and generic this, generic that, then the film as a whole probably wouldn't work. So I think the fact that they've kind of removed from that, but also done things that are familiar, which in terms of the high concept thing like you mentioned, which is aliens land on Earth, done something familiar, but also then taken everything which is very unfamiliar. I think that's where the film works a lot.
Perfect example of that, which I read, I didn't realize this myself, is that you on the one hand you think, oh, the spaceships look quite different than what you think of other aliens, but at the end when they turn over, they are literally saucers.
That's a great point,
and apparently that I don't know if that's in the short story. I think that was more of a design idea for the movie, and they decided to design them that way, but to have them vertical so it's not obvious.
Yeah,
but then when they turn over, they're saucers.
Yeah, now I'm not going to be able to unsee that when I watch it again. But no, I don't think in the short story they talk about the visual look of the spacecraft at all. I think they talk about the looking glass, and they talk about the look of the. So in the short story, the aliens have eyes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they don't have eyes.
They don't have eyes, so I think they look a bit like indented in certain points of their body, like just above what look like the legs.
Well, yeah, it looks like a hand with 8 legs, but then the knuckles, the knuckles are where they should be. I mean, that would be even creepier. Yeah, that is there. I saw that in the short story, the names are different of the aliens. It's Raspberry and something instead of Abbott and Costello. It's very random, but it does work. The whole Abbott and Costello thing.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of the themes, but let's just check if we've hit them all. So obviously the circularity of time, I think that one we've hit, and how that works with time travel, the predetermination, everything.
Yeah.
Written down here. So war, obviously there's the war at the beginning, question thing, then the weapons. Yeah, what is this film's take on war? That basically people should collaborate together and not like that we're stronger together rather than fighting each other.
Yeah, I think that's probably the main theme of the film that we've maybe not touched on.
Collaboration.
Briefly. Yeah, collaboration. But I think that's kind of one of the main themes of the film is about working together and not cutting yourselves off with communication and being obviously open-ended and open-minded. And obviously, it sounds a bit airy-fairy to be honest. And especially if you've not watched the film, when you've gotten to this point in the podcast, it probably does sound
you're going to be so confused then.
Yeah, definitely. It just kind of works in the context of the film. And again, I think it comes down to it being quite a grounded film in terms of obviously our perspective, and our character that we follow isn't really military-minded in that way. Her main objective, her main motivation is to understand the aliens and understand their language, and that's obviously what she does for a living, and that's what she cares about. She's not really bothered about necessarily the agenda and are they here for aggression. She doesn't really have those concepts or ever bring up those questions. I think the most interesting part of the film, and we've touched on it a lot, I think, which is really interesting in terms of what your perspective is going into the film, what your perspective is going into a situation, as the characters do in this film. And I think the characters all go in, not all of them, sorry, Louise and Ian obviously don't, but most of the characters go into this alien scenario with their guard up.
Yeah.
They go in defensively, and they go in thinking, oh my god, they're here, they're going to hurt us. They don't like the element of mystery, whereas I guess Ian and Louise go in with a kind of an optimistic, hopeful sort of mindset. They're like, oh, this is interesting, this is new, this is something that's, unheard of, unknown, but we're fascinated and intrigued by it. And I think where the other characters kind of go in with that defensive element, they kind of apply that to the aliens, and they say, oh, these aliens are going to react like this, or when they use the word weapon, they mean it like we mean it. But obviously the aliens at no point throughout the film, I don't think anyway, show any point of aggression, hostility. They're very patient as well. I think they could literally just spatter everything on screen, couldn't they, right at the beginning? In all terms of their language, you'd be like, here you go, here's the gift that we're offering. But obviously they know that in order to get to that end point, they have to build things slowly.
Yeah.
Build that relationship and collaboration slowly. So I think they have that understanding. Whereas a lot of the human characters obviously don't have that appreciation and understanding. And it's not until obviously at the end where Louise forces the hand of the Chinese military leader, General Shang. Not forces his hand necessarily, but she kind of encourages him and convinces him.
Well, the irony is that her mission is to basically teach them English so that they can ask him the question, "What are you doing here?" But really, their goal is to teach her that is their explicit goal, to teach her their language, because by learning the language, she understands the circularity of time, and that's the gift.
Yeah.
So just like she says, "Oh, we need time," that's what they're doing. They're like, "Yeah, we need time to teach you."
Yeah.
I guess that is an interesting thing about the collaboration, is the idea that when you're trying to teach someone something, but then you end up learning from it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point actually, and it makes me think of a potential plot hole in the film actually, which is obviously Louise has a very good grasp on the language by the end of the film, but she actually hasn't really known the language for that long. She's only maybe known it for 1 or 2 months. I think at one point in the film it says day 27 of the alien incident, even though actually that's another potential plot hole, because Ian mentions it's been over a month, and then he says it's going to take another month to do X, Y, and Z. So potentially those two things don't match up. But then the fact that Ian doesn't actually know the future is a potential plot hole, because you'd assume...
Well, he doesn't know the language either, does he?
No, but I'd guess because you assume that they don't just have the baby as soon as the film ends. But you
I don't know. It's been a stressful couple of months.
True. But you'd assume because Louise has such a good grasp of the language relatively early on, and then obviously she's trying to then introduce it to other people, you'd expect almost the second in command, if you like, of the second highest authority in the language, which would be Ian, because he's been there and he has had a good understanding of it. Because as they've put the symbols on the screen through the looking glass throughout the film, he does recognise them and understand them. But then obviously he doesn't know the future of his daughter and the outcome of that situation until Louise actually verbally tells him it.
I definitely think you could nitpick that into a plot hole, but I see it more as her being the foremost expert on an ancient language that no one, like a dead language that no one speaks. I'm sure there are a couple of people in the world that can technically speak it because they know it so well, and they write books and they can help people. But just because you're being helped by, or even a mid-level expert, doesn't necessarily mean that you fully understand it.
Yeah,
so
no, that's
I think
a
he's
fair
more
point,
like an assistant that, whereas she is the person who literally writes the book on it. Mm-hmm. And because she has that full circle knowledge of it, because I guess it's like it's almost, and this, I think you can nitpick because knowing a language shouldn't give you a superpower. But basically the idea is that by understanding the language, you basically get a power of seeing time constantly. But yeah, I think only she gets that.
Yeah, she has the superpower.
Another thing that you brought up there that I thought was interesting is you talked about how different people are reacting in different ways. But to be fair, her and Ian are in the spaceship. They're meeting them. They see how friendly they are, and they're working together. The people, the soldiers in the room are literally a couple of steps behind, and they don't understand anything about linguistics, and they're more scared. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the soldiers that are like Forest Whitaker goes up sometimes, but not always. But he's basically, the more removed you get, the more scared people are, and I think that does show the whole idea of basically the things that people are scared throughout human history more than anything is the unknown. The people in the street, because until halfway through the movie when there's that picture that emerges, which is probably just a soldier took, people didn't even know what they looked like. And it doesn't matter what you're being told by your leaders. If there was just a mysterious spaceship that was there and you didn't know what it was, you would be scared and you would assume the worst. And I guess that, again, it just shows the value of information and knowledge, and that without it you end up getting violent and panicking.
Yeah, I think you summed that up perfectly.
Just to wrap up then, we've been through this film with a fine-tooth comb, so just bring it all together for us about, once again, what is it about this movie? Why is it so important to you? And finally, where does it rank in your all-time?
Big question there at the end. So yeah, I think it just comes back to those two main things. I think as a form, I think this film just works as something that's been translated to the film of form because of the non-linear elements to it, how it's edited, how it's put together, how it's paced, and how the story kind of progresses and then is slowly unravelled towards the end. I think that just works on a technical level for me really well. And as someone who appreciates and loves the form of film, that just works perfectly for me.
So you appreciate the craft.
Appreciate the craft, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a nice way to put it. And then on the flip side of that, and obviously complementary to how it's put together, but the kind of emotional core of the film, and I can't, like I said earlier, I can't really articulate that perfectly into words. I don't know why that strikes such a chord with me and why that means so much to me, and I think that's okay. No. It doesn't have to make perfect sense to me. It's just your emotions don't always make perfect sense to yourself, do they? And you're the one experiencing them. So I think it just means something to me, like deep down, that maybe when I hopefully one day do become a parent, that then maybe I'll have a greater appreciation and even a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation of the film. And then in terms of where it ranks all time, I'm not like overly fixated on, oh, this film is number one or this film is
No, but
top
I
10
am.
or
So
but you are, and we're on your podcast, so I appreciate that. But if
you're allowed to change this. But as of right now, if you were to make a list of your top 100 movies, where do you think this would rank?
I go number one, I think.
Number one.
I wouldn't hesitate to put it in number one, and that's why when you asked me a year or a year and a half ago, whenever it was, what film would you talk about on a podcast, I think that's why I didn't hesitate to mention this film then, because it's the first one that comes to mind. You know, I have other films that I love, like the original Blade Runner, which obviously you mentioned earlier. That
maybe one. Listen, I'm open to doing movies on this that I don't necessarily love, so maybe we'll do Blade Runner one day.
But yeah, this is the film I think that stands out for me. I think, yeah, because of the emotional importance to me that, like I said, I don't fully understand myself, but also just from the technical point of view. And I like sci-fi, just to put it simply. If you want to go on a baseline point of view, I like science fiction, I like alien films, and this is a very good alien film.
Well, there's nothing else to say.